lobby. Got quite a busy lobby today. As you arrive, we'd be massively grateful if you'd pop yourself on mute, just because there's bound to be lots of background noise. It's lovely to see you all. You can hear the pips as people are coming in. Still got a few folk in the lobby and looking forward to getting going. We'll probably just give a couple of minutes for folk to join us, because there'll be people hopping on straight from other meetings. Again, if you could just mute yourselves as you come in, we'd be really, really grateful. Just drops down on the background noise a little bit. Anybody who isn't on mute, if you could just mute yourselves, that would be fantastic.
Oh, Caroline, I think someone might have accidentally muted you.
Well, that's terrible. I was just saying, please, could everyone be muted? And there I was. Very definitely muted myself. Thank you, everybody. Really, really appreciate it. We do want to make this as interactive as possible, but if you could, if you're not speaking or during the time when the speakers are talking, if you could be on mute, that would be great. So I'm Caroline. I'm the Chief Executive NHS Elected. It's our pleasure and privilege to be hosting this day on behalf of the Capacity and Demand team. Fantastic opportunity to learn more about system dynamics and to really spend the day looking at both the concept and also really practically how you might apply it to address some of the issues that we're facing in our health and care systems right now. So it's really, really lovely to be here. As I said, as people were coming in, if you could stay on mute, if you're not speaking or participating, but please do use the chat lots. There'll be lots of opportunity for Q&A. If you can stick your questions in the chat, I'll keep an eye out for those. I'm going to pass over to Edward next, who's going to give us a little bit of an interaction just to get to know a bit who's on the call, but it's really lovely to see so many people here today. We will be recording the session today, so please do just bear that in mind. And yeah, without further ado, look forward to getting going. Handing over to you, Edward. Thank you.
Welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Some of you have already started dropping your pin of where you are joining us from today. You can see a nice mix across the country. Someone is, I'm not sure, is that my geography is now going to be tested? Is that Jersey or is that in the channel? That's yeah. We may even have people joining from outside the UK as well. So welcome, everyone. I will also just switch the question to the next question, which is what brings you here today? If I can just get my question to move. Hopefully that will move for you now. And it will be really great to hear what has brought you here today. If you might be an expert in system dynamics, in which case we'd love to hear from you. And there'll be opportunities for you to share your experiences later. It might be your first time hearing about it. We're here. I think you can still see my screen. We can see the responses. A lot of people here to learn more around demand and capacity modelling and system modelling, to get better understanding, to improve techniques, and get some tips. So this is a learning day. We'll be sharing lots of examples from across the country of people applying system modelling. So hopefully it'll be a good day to learn and for you to connect with each other as well. Thank you everyone for that. I will stop sharing my screen now and I'll pass back to you, Caroline.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And yeah, we've got people coming in from Sydney, Australia, where I think it must be late in the day. So really lovely to welcome so many people here today from all different parts of our beautiful country and wider still. So we're going to have a bit of a kind of getting started session, particularly looking at working systems. But we've got 4 fantastic speakers who are going to join us today. We're going to talk for about 10 minutes each, lots of opportunity to share and ask questions. So pop those in the chat, raise your hands if you actually want to speak, but mainly taking stuff from the chat today. And I'm going to start with Alice Lunston. Alice is the head of the capacity and demand team here at NHS England. And Alice, you're going to help us by sort of setting the scene and giving an overview. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. So first of all, just fantastic to see so many of you joining us. Vanessa will be talking a bit more in a minute, but Vanessa and I have been passionate about system dynamics and modelling at a system level for many years now. So it's wonderful to get to this point where there is a real interest and appetite. And I think with the formation of the integrated care boards being so recent, we're at a turning point where actually systems thinking is probably right on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the day, seeing how it unfolds. Do enjoy it, but also do let us know what you think. So we want this to be a two-way process. We want it to be a day where we hear from you as well as you hearing from us. You're going to hear from some amazing speakers who are able to put, hopefully, into context what system dynamics is, how it can be used, what the reality of that can look like on the ground. The bit that really excites me is that it gives us an opportunity to think strategically about how we do things at a system level. So instead of it being more of a reactive form of modelling, which I think definitely has its place, and we've been doing a lot of that within the team over the years, it's around that more strategic, forward-looking, medium to long-term vision. And that's the bit that gets me really excited, and it's wonderful to see what is possible and what we can do going forward. So I'm going to hand over to Vanessa now, who will give us a bit more context about system dynamics.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It is a pleasure. I'm Vanessa Perez. I'm the technical lead for system dynamics modeling in the demand and capacity team. And I mentioned my role because this role didn't exist 2.5 years ago. It was created when we started talking about ICSs. And it's because NHS England saw the need to support ICSs with a proper system level planning. And also there was the analytical need out there. People needed other techniques to be able to do this type of modeling. So that's when this role was created. I was already a member of the team, but I think that's part of the history, how we got here. And it's been a journey for us. Alice mentioned a little bit what we mean about when we say system level demand and capacity modeling. And I wanted to start my short presentation is only 2 slides from me. And I'm sharing my screen now. Yes? Okay, fine. Yes. This is what we mean when we say system level demand and capacity modeling. And I wanted to start from here because some of the benefits that we see in system dynamics as a modeling approach are linked to what the NHS and the care sector needs to consider when planning services in a strategic way. We have a component about population health. System dynamics allow us to split population into cohorts. So we have different groups of people with different needs, and we are able to assess what might happen to them in the future if we implement a number of policies. That's one of the benefits of using system dynamics from a clinical and a patient point of view. We can also model the progression of conditions. So if we start thinking in our population in groups, we have people who have no conditions, so healthy cohorts of our population, but then some people will develop a condition, for example, let's say diabetes. We don't get to diabetes immediately. There is something in between. It's being pre-diabetic. That progression of the condition is something that can be modeled also using system dynamics. From an analytical point of view, it gives analysts and business intelligence colleagues the opportunity to test a number of scenarios. And we know that ICS will be asking analysts to provide a range of options. What might happen if? And this is a suitable approach for those type of questions. For decision makers in ICSs and operational colleagues, system dynamics will give you that opportunity to look at patient pathways, complete patient pathway on one screen. to test new ways of delivering care, reallocating resources, and we also have a benefit of using system dynamics to model workforce. Not only the workforce that we have at the moment, but incorporating people who are receiving training. How long will it take for them to move from being in that training stage to being able to deliver care, and then also to consider others leaving the service? We know that some people are retiring, and in particular in nursing, we have a significant proportion of colleagues who are going to be retiring soon. How do we plan workforce in the future? We need to account for all of those factors, and system dynamics is an approach that allow us to consider all of those factors. Our team is not dictating an approach, and I want to be very open about it. We are just showing you what is possible. We have run earlier this year another webinar, series of webinars about other modeling approaches as well. Those resources are already available in our future NHS network for you to have a look. Today is dedicated to system dynamic, but it's not the only approach. Later on, we are going to touch on that as well in one of the presentations. So what is the demand and capacity team doing, offering you if you are in an ICS or if you are in a provider and you are engaging in system level demand and capacity modeling? We are developing resources for you. We are hosting them on our Future NHS platform. And most of those resources, some of them, sorry, are going to be presented to you today. We are starting the day talking about what ICSs need to consider if they want to embed system dynamics. What are the different domains they need to assess? They need to assess themselves. So we are presenting in the morning that readiness assessment framework for ICSs, but also analysts need to develop skills. And that process of skilling up is going to be also introduced today, what analysts need to develop. All the system dynamics resources that are available within the NHS and other across the world. We are trying to put directory resources available for you, so you don't have to do all that research yourself. We are going to provide it for you. We have also developed, in collaboration with an intern from University of Exeter, a learning tool for ICS leaders. That's in the afternoon session. We are piloting the approach. We started last year with Norfolk and Waveney ICS. They are going to join us in the urgent and emergency care presentation today, because they started with an elective care pilot, but now they are using system dynamics for urgent and emergency care. And that tells you a bit of the flexibility of the approach. It's not a model, it's an approach that can be used for different type of issue that you are modeling in your ICS. We are also piloting with other ICSs. We invited Bristol and North Somerset ICS in the morning session as well. They are going to tell you what they are doing, how they are using system dynamics. We are also compiling case studies. Some of those case studies have been supported by us, but we are also happy to share resources of other systems who are using system dynamics and all other modeling approaches. So not all case studies in the platform have been supported by us. We are just serving as a platform to share those experiences, and everyone can learn from it. We are hosting events like today, and we hope that we can support a community of practice of system dynamics practitioners in the future. And this is an invite for you. We have a session in the afternoon dedicated to the community of practice. We would like to hear from you what support you need from us. And hopefully that's going to help us to scope and to shape the offer that we're going to be providing to you in the next financial year. That's what I got to mention at this point, Caroline and Peter. I'm going to hand over to Peter at this point.
Thank you, Vanessa. And hello, everybody. I'm Peter Lacey. I'm Director at Health Systems Partnership. Together with Mark, we're going to do a bit of an introductory session. I'm just going to change the slides here. Should be that one. And let's go to... There we go. So what is system dynamics? System maturity framework, individual competency framework. The two of these have been sort of commissioned and worked with Vanessa and the demand and capacity team, just to give you a starter and to give you a bit more detail in terms of the offers that are available. I was introduced to system dynamics modelling back in 1992 at things that used to be called regional health authorities, and it's stayed with me since. And fundamental to systems modelling is a way of thinking. So I thought I'd start with just a slide about what is a system. You'll see a reference there at the bottom, and I think I can sort of show to my camera the Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. It is the book that everybody should read. Came out since I started playing with system dynamics, but she in that book very simply describes a system as consisting of three things: stuff, connections, and purpose. Stuff that you measure, identifiable components, connections in terms of the way in which stuff links across systems, and purpose. And I'll give you a couple of very simple examples in a moment. But the added benefit of modeling using the sort of systems thinking approach, using system dynamics, the fundamental ones that people always talk about, and I've seen over many years now, is that it captures delays and feedback, the two bottom points there, in ways that other modelling approaches sometimes struggle with. Again, I'll share about when system dynamics is particularly helpful. Vanessa's already sort of hinted at that. So here's two examples. Let's take ourselves away from health for a moment. A sports team is a system. It has players, those are the stuff. It has connections, rules and relationships. It has purpose, to score more goals, points or nets than the other team. But a sports team will experience delays in terms of its performance as players grow to understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, for example, and others. And feedback, when overtraining might, in pursuit of excellence, might cause burnout. My dot on the map earlier was in Yorkshire, and Leeds United were often seen as the team that couldn't quite launch itself into the top echelons of football because it basically burnt out or spent out or had a sort of unintended consequence of the search for excellence. Football supporters might recognise that in other teams, but in health. It's a whole range. So just thinking about when you recognise and identify a system in terms of behaviours and things that are going on. A health system clearly has stuff, a whole range of different types of stuff: patients, workforce, beds, etc. It has connections, which we would describe as protocols, policies, relationships, all very important in terms of constructing an approach to making better decisions. And it has a common purpose. Of course, ultimately, our common purpose is to improve individual and population health outcomes. Sometimes we forget that. In sort of subsets of systems, our objectives might be slightly different in terms of performance, efficiency, effectiveness, etc. But fundamentally, there is always in a system a common purpose, and that common purpose helps to define the boundaries of any modelling interventions that we undertake. It clearly experiences delays, long lead times for workforce, for example, and feedback when capacity constraints increase waiting lists. So all of these things are characteristic. And just to get a basic sort of grounding in thinking in systems would be essential for anybody, whether you're a technical person or a strategic person, having that common mindset of thinking in systems. You might want to think about things in your life that are affecting you, professional or personal, and label them with those three elements. Stuff, connections, and purpose are fundamental to every system. System dynamics is when you take that systems thinking and turn it into a mathematical model. They are fundamentally a way of reflecting stakeholders' understanding of how a particular system works. It's not primarily a data modeling process. It's a data-informed process, and it does that sort of process of understanding a particular system. It's fundamentally about engagement, learning, feedback, iteration between stakeholders and the model itself. All of the projects that we run start with a very simple model, build it, engage with clients, think about the data to populate it. It isn't an ivory tower exercise at all. System dynamics models are designed and provide insight into system behavior over time. Vanessa's already mentioned the what-if scenarios. We are living in an uncertain, and in some senses, we can't manage it precisely, the systems that we operate in, but we need to explore what ifs and be adaptable in the complex systems that we work in. And the model building process is as important as the final output. It aligns people's language. It generates conversations that you probably wouldn't have in other processes. So we thought we'd show you a model very quickly. It's stock flow. This model, it's right down the line of priorities. It's elective recovery. I built this model in 2 or 3 hours, reflecting on the Health Secretary's policy announcement, maybe now 6 months ago, about the ambition to reduce waiting times over a period of time, acknowledging that there are uncertainties in that process. And very simply, you've got on the top half here, and they do connect, we just would have been too long and thin. There's a whole sector there about presenting need interrupted by COVID. How do we get a grasp of what backlog, virtual backlog, there is in the community of people who haven't presented for certain types of needs? And how will that be released into the system where we have a waiting list issue and challenge with treatment capacity being a constraint? And that then, in terms of learning, we built a simple interface model there. You'll see the title there, Project RUM. RUM is really useful models. If you're interested in sharing this model and using it and potentially adapting it, then you'll need to come to the session at 2:40 with Matt Stammers, who will introduce a little bit more about Project RUM, which is a new venture, not-for-profit, to make some of these models open source, adaptable and shareable. For all your analysts out there, in terms of your analytical tasks and proficiencies, Mark will run through a competency framework briefly in a short while. But this is something that Abraham George down in Kent uses and talks a lot about. It's the Gartner Continuum, and it positions the type of analytics, the prescriptive analytics, the forecasting simulation that builds on the descriptive, diagnostic and predictive, but actually gives you a sort of added layer of insight and development. System dynamics helps us to move from hindsight through insights to foresight. When this is Sally Brailsford from Southampton University, written quite a lot on system dynamics, is also an expert in discrete event simulation. And she's distinguished here, and this is just a useful sort of reference point. When do you use system dynamics as opposed to other approaches? And there are some key words there in terms of being strategic, large quantities, aggregate data, not individuals, rates, long time scales, policy making, all things that integrated care systems really need to get a handle on. And what does success look like? Another sort of article that you can refer to, and they reflect what I've talked about already in terms of good interventions that have high levels of communication and interaction. Yes, we need modeler skills. You can't use system dynamics without decent modeling skills, but responsiveness, flexibility, involvement and engagement, and the customer of any client organization being committed, supportive and engaged in that work. So there's a lot of soft stuff in there that are the predictors of success in the adoption of system dynamics modeling. Hopefully that's helpful. There may be 1 or 2 questions. I can't see the chat or anything when I'm sharing like this.
Yeah,
So,
thanks, Peter. It's Caroline here. I'm just coming in with a couple, actually. We've got some lovely questions popping up in the chat. So we've got a question from Laurie that's also been supported by others, including Adrienne, to just say, are there challenges in defining system and subsystem boundaries? And do you have any top tips on that?
Certainly challenges, but something that you constantly need to review. So in the early stages of building a model, the issue is the key focus, and that the system boundary needs to be material to the issue that you're modeling. Project drift is common in a lot of areas, and project drift, sort of trying to model the whole world, is a temptation, but won't be helpful. So my top tip there is define the issue carefully and allow the issue to define the boundaries, and only include in those boundaries those things that are material to the issue in question.
Fantastic, thank you. And a second question, if you would, please, Peter, which is from Martin, which says, to what extent do you think that good system dynamic models require metrics? Any thoughts you can share with us on that, Peter?
Metrics, I'd probably need to understand what's meant by metrics.
Martin, feel free to come off mute if you'd like to, or pop something more in the chat on that one. Otherwise, we'll pick that one up later again.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Hi, Peter. Nice to see you again.
Hi.
I suppose I mean numbers, because I noticed a lot of system dynamic models are sort of using sort of estimates based on opinions and things like that. I mean, so they're more qualitative in nature. And at some point, it's quite useful to put numbers on things. So that's broadly what I mean.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Martin.
So I probably distinguish three types of data that can populate a system dynamics model, and there needs to be a balance with sufficient sort of I suppose evidence-based metrics, data that you can verify in terms of it not only looks right but is right in terms of the local context, the size of your waiting list, the rate at which people access services. Those are important data points to get right. They won't always be readily available in a local system when you start from modeling the issue rather than the data. But there need to be sufficient good quality data anchors in a system dynamics model in order for you to build confidence in it and make the right decisions. However, there will be missing data, poor quality data, and because of the nature of system dynamics modeling, you can triangulate. And you know, you've got two data points in any triangle, and for trigonometry experts or even amateurs, the third point needs to be within a certain range to reflect the degree of accuracy. So using placeholder assumptions that you can vary because you're not certain, that are broadly right, is a key part of and a key skill in developing a system dynamics model. There are, however, as Martin has suggested, and it's an advantage of using system dynamics, that you can add in certain behavioral relationships that again sort of test and shouldn't ever sort of cause a model to fly off in strange directions. But we know that people's behaviors change. The propensity for a GP to refer to a waiting list when they know that a waiting list is very long will change. And so some of those qualitative elements feed in. So those three, you know, hard-nosed metrics, data that you can verify, triangulated data assumptions that you can explore, and behavioral elements can all fit within, and you need a balance of those to give you confidence in terms of using the model and making your decisions.
Thanks so much, Peter. That was great. A couple more questions and then we'll allow you to move on if that's okay. Graham just asked, have you worked with or built a model for emergency ambulance services at all in your vast experience?
We've built models with ambulance response, not times, but ability. This is a sort of granular level. So if ambulance response within a system of urgent and emergency care pathways, where the dispositions occur, whether there's sort of see and treat, hear and treat, etc., are all often part of the sort of strategic level urgent and emergency care pathways. If you're looking at operational challenges around ambulance response times and queuing outside A&E, etc., you might want to consider whether that's a strategic or an operational tactical, and whether therefore system dynamics is the right tool. So there's a yes and no to that answer.
Thank you. And obviously we come on next, I think, to talking about using system dynamics in emergency and urgent care. So
we'll stay
with us and let's see what that looks like indeed. Thank you. And I'm just going to take the next question from Bruce, because I know you've got some more slides to go through, Peter, so don't want to completely derail your presentation, but there's lots and lots of interesting questions popping up for you. So if we have a bit more time, we'll come back to them. So Bruce is just interested, and I think this is really interesting, isn't it? That link between system dynamics and improvement methodologies.
Yep.
And any thoughts about how you've seen that work well, what to look out for, what to avoid, the sort of challenge of implementation on the ground there?
Yeah, I mean, it sits very nicely within an improvement cyclical sort of learning sort of process. I've mentioned already building a simple prototype, sometimes in a matter of hours, just to say, this is how I think I reflect people's mental models. I've stuck some dummy data, we need to improve that, etc. And then going through the process, but also the improvement process in terms of when you've got a model that you think is good to base your decisions on, you've also got something that will tell you what to expect in terms of what will happen next. We often in system dynamics talk about the expected and observed behavior within a system. The model will project forward how your interventions will impact on key metrics. You'll then put that into your sort of monitoring framework, and 6 months down the line, you'll say, oh, it didn't quite happen like that. It happened broadly like that, but not quite. And that drives the improvement. It drives improvement in terms of how you're relating to the system. It also, make a separate point, it definitely drives improvement in data quality. So there are very few projects where the stimulus to go back to the data, which sometimes hasn't been used for anything other than feeding a beast somewhere, in which case the quality may be good or bad or indifferent. Actually, you're now using that data for real live sort of strategic decisions that you observe then don't quite work. And actually you can be drawn back on an improvement cycle for your data quality as well as the service delivery process. No system dynamics model is ever complete, final, and sort of boxed up. It's there to go with you on the journey.
Thank you. And I think, Bruce, you might have wanted to come in on this. And if you do, please do. Bruce, if you're speaking, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We've got you now, thank you.
Yeah, I just had to plug my headphones in.
No worries at all.
And I put my camera on as well, but I'm looking at the other screen, so that I'm fine not looking at you. No, great. Thanks for that answer, Peter. I think I wonder if, in a way that systems dynamics can help define, and if I use lean speak now, can define a future state, and then you can start the progression of interim states to move towards that. So therefore, you know where you're trying to head to, in all sorts of different ways of how much workforce you might need, how much flow you might need at a certain point, what to do, from a month down to week, down to day, down to hour, sort of set of measures that you'd be trying to kind of maintain. Because if we can maintain 3 discharges a day, for example, pick a number, then we know that, and if we can maintain the figure defined by the model across all of the wards, then we should be doing okay. And then we can also, if we only hit 2 or we hit 1 discharge, we can ask ourselves the question in a huddle, what got in the way? So that's a pure lean daily continuous improvement thing. So that could take its lead from the numbers, the guidance that came out of the model.
Yeah. So the model will, I'd be wary of too much micromanagement, but I don't think you're suggesting that. I think you're suggesting, if we only see one day after day sort of thing. So it's not a knee-jerk one day sort of reaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it does provide the framework and an envelope within which you can then move forward comfortably. But I'd make another important point in terms of system dynamics, because things can get worse before they get better, or indeed you may well be wanting to manage a transitional state anyway. So if we go back to the simple case that virtually everything we're talking about and modelling at the moment has a COVID overhang, then you need to work out what workforce you need over the next 2 years, but that might not be the workforce that you need in 3 to 5 years when you hopefully hit some sort of steady state. Equally, some of the interventions that you might put into a system will have different burn rates, if you like. So something that you're putting in terms of prevention will only bear dividends again in the longer term. And you need to think about those things. So it's not a straight line, steady state. We're going to go from A to B, and it's sort of 20% every year for the next 5 years. There will be changes, and that's where sort of keeping faith with what the model is suggesting, having understood and developed your insights, but being open to the model continue to be wrong and in need of improvement. There is the mantra, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I'll just throw that one in, because if nobody says that today, it'll be a failure.
It'll be a bad day, indeed. Thank you, Peter. Shall we let you proceed with your presentation?
I'm going to hand on to Mark now to run through the other half.
Thank you so much, Mark. Come on in, and we have lots more questions in the chat. So if we've got time for a bit of Q&A at the end of Mark's presentation, all to the good. Thank you.
Have you taken control, Mark?
Yeah, I have. I've added an extra slide in that you might not have. Thanks, Peter. I'm just reflecting slightly of what Peter said when he started off, that he started doing system dynamics in 1992, and I would have been aged 9 then, and still at primary school. So yeah, you're a tough man to follow on from, Peter. So, so I'm going to talk to you a bit about, and it will be a whistle-stop tour of a system maturity framework that we've collaborated with and developed alongside the demand and capacity team, specifically Vanessa. So yeah, this is just the extra slide that I'd put in, which is just a bit of a sub-contents of what I'll talk about today, but which is why a maturity framework for systems, and the 7 domains that we've developed as part of that. A short example of the maturity matrix, using the 7 domains, and the readiness assessment tool that systems can use, and then an analyst individual competency framework that kind of falls off that, really. And then just a little bit about supporting the adoption of SD, certainly that Vanessa had pointed to in her talk earlier. And that might come in and more discussions with the community of practice workshop that I think's in at the end of the day. So why a maturity framework? Well, I think building on what has been said, really, which is, as ICSs are being formed, there's the growing need to integrate services, and I say that it really is a journey rather than an endpoint, really, in respects of integration. But there's obviously all that growing need of certainly organisations to work together, and they can't necessarily just kind of do their own thing. So there's a greater understanding that SD can support in that decision making. But coupled with that is actually, for those who understand, that actually there is a lack of understanding of those who don't really understand SD, and actually the capability to be able to create models at a system level from within the NHS, rather than necessarily having to get specialist help in to come and support in developing these models. So this is about supporting systems or organisations in the ability to be able to start to develop SD models themselves, and what they need to do, assess where they are and what they need to do. We've done that through a system maturity matrix and the readiness assessment tool, and then finally an individual competency framework. So Vanessa and the team have been doing a few seminars about this, and she talked about how there'll be more about understanding and Vanessa and the team supporting system dynamics across England, and as part of that, the previous seminar, she asked for some volunteers for us to be able to do some semi-structured interviews with, to be able to just ask the questions about people's experiences of using SD in their organisation, and that was spread between people who weren't quite novices, all through into actually people who are very experienced in the use of SD. We then distilled that down into, okay, well, what do you need? What does a system or organization need in order to develop SD models at that level? And it's not just about, and we started with this because it's not just about, and Peter's touched on, it's not just about the analytical and modeling capability. Yes, you need the modeling capabilities, because if you don't have that, then you'll never have a model. But there's everything else around that kind of analytical function that needs to exist in order to develop a really robust, good system dynamics model. And we've created 7. And I'll just go into detail, a little bit more detail on this next slide. The first one being leadership. You need people, you need senior kind of involvement in the development of a model, because you need to be able to bring people together. If you think in pan organizations, you need that system level leadership to be able to bring people together, because you need to gather intelligence, conceptualize issues, conceptualize the system, and you can't do that from within one organization. It needs to be pan. So that needs leadership, and that needs commitment really from that leader as well, to know that actually a modeling process might take 3 months, and actually it's the commitment throughout to be able to bring and sustain that commitment. There's obviously the analytical capability, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But people need the skills to develop skills in system dynamics to be able to develop the model itself. Peter's touched on data and information. Yes, you need data. Data needs to power the model. But we do say that actually you don't need all of the data, and system dynamics is a good tool to be able to A, fill in the gaps, or B, actually start to direct better gathering of data. But it's that phrase of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good kind of things, and stop you developing these models. The software and infrastructure. So it's difficult to get away from the fact that actually to develop a system dynamics model and using the approach, actually there's really good pieces of software out there, but actually they need to be paid for. So there's other options. There is free tools that can be used, but they can be limited in how big your model can be. But we did explore that the option of using things like R and Python to develop models as well. Understanding and awareness, but it can be really difficult to people kind of non-technical in a system to understand kind of the use of system dynamics and the questions that can be asked when using system dynamics and developing a system dynamics model. And I think it's really what we understood is that it's, if people have a basic understanding of not just what a system dynamics model can do, but also the process that's required in order to complete one. Because often it might be the case that people think they just come in at the beginning of a workshop and then just that's the end of it. Well, actually, it's quite an iterative process, and people need to be engaged throughout. And it links a little bit in with the leadership aspect of that. And then admin and project support. So bringing people together is a challenge, and it takes a lot of work, which I'm sure the demand and capacity team have found in developing this workshop, for example, is that there's a lot of work that has to go on administratively in bringing people together, and that's part of the process, and it's got nothing to do with the technical modeling skills whatsoever. So what we've always found, and people say, is that actually if there is that support, then it takes some of those tasks away for certainly leaders of modeling projects to be able to get on with other stuff. And then there's relationships, and this is certainly one of the softer things that Peter mentioned about, is that in order to bring people together, you need good relationships, really. So it's a bit of a cornerstone, and with any transformation, you certainly need good relationships. But organizations have their own targets and have their own things to do. So if you have good relationships, you're able to bring people together better and trust the process. So as part of the matrix tool, each of those domains then have a level of maturity of 1 saying, okay, this is of least mature, and then 4 of most mature, and that goes across each of the 7 domains. And systems or organizations can assess themselves as to where they are against each of those domains, and then consider actually what does it take to then move into up the next level. What do they need to do? So it's a bit of an indicative guide, and there's just an example there of software and infrastructure. So actually, what does really good or really mature look like in respect of software and infrastructure is that actually modelers all the modelers who are going to use SD have access to an appropriate piece of software, or they have sufficient and appropriate skills to develop system dynamics model in R or in Python or in some other code. They then have the ability to develop an interface that can be accessed by non-technical stakeholders via a dashboard perhaps, and that funding is in place for continued use, that actually the funding isn't just for this one project and then the funding goes away and then that's the end of it. Actually, there's a continued support by the system and organization to be able to continually develop the capabilities and be able to develop further models. So that's just an example. This is kind of how the matrix tool is presented, and I've kept all the detail out and the words out because they were about size 6 or 7. So I'd see you all leaning into the screen and then and then complaining to me that you can't read it. So I've left it out on purpose and just gave you that example. But I hope that's okay. Then you can kind of go through each of those domains, sum it all up, and you come out with a figure. And this again is just an indicative guide as to the ambition that you might want to set yourself in developing a model. From actually, saying, well, actually, you don't have the capability really to develop a model, and you probably need to just commission the piece of work to be done, through all the way to the right hand side there, actually saying you can do this and you can do a really big model and you can do it yourself. But certainly, if many systems aren't going to be on the right hand side, many systems are going to be on the left. But if you are going to be getting that specialist help, then you consider how are you going to develop and use those skills to develop your capability within, either through education and training, etc. So a little bit about an individual competency framework for analysts and modelers. There's obviously a strong need for analytical capability, and the weighting of those domains might be more into the analytical capability than necessarily others. But I wanted to start with that and just ensure that the focus isn't and shouldn't be on the analysts. It needs to be on system-wide and all of those domains. But it's difficult to move away from the fact that actually you do need analysts. They do need to be able to do a lot of the technical grunt work of this. So the framework outlines 5 skills and competencies, including systems thinking, model development, the process, building the model, communication, and evaluation skills. I'm not going to say too much more about that, but it will be available, and it's linked to the KSB and the Institute for Apprentices for an Improved Level 7 System Thinking Practitioner. And then I'm going to kind of, I'll hand over to Peter in a minute, but we wanted to also consider, well, actually, once you've done the assessment tool, actually then how do systems, or particularly kind of analysts think about where can they develop their skills and improve their maturity. There's certainly a focus more here on the analytical capability. So we did a director of resources that you'll be able to access over in next week, and the team will send out where you can access this from. But there'll be the indications of formal training approaches, including higher education institutions, but also courses from like software companies, and there's links through the System Dynamics Society as well. There's a plethora of online resources, things like through YouTube and things, to get you started. Certainly, if you buy some of the some of the software, there's lots of training programs and videos and support through some of them. There's obviously the software and the tools. So we've highlighted what software is out there and the tools that you can use as part of developing system dynamics, and we've tried to list all of them there. I think once you get into it, practitioners tend to stick to one piece of software, and you know, that's and you can imagine why that would be. People get used to things, but there's a number out there. Some are more popular than others, and then there's obviously cost implications as well. And then finally, you know, sometimes the best resource really of learning is learning from others. So we explored a little bit, and when performing some of the interviews around asking people about, you know, what does a learning network look like, and I'll hand over to Peter now, and there'll be a conversation later in the day about that as well. But Peter, I'll come back to you.
Thanks, Peter. You're still on mute at the moment.
Muted. Final slide, and then Caroline, you might want to see whether there's other questions, statements, or the likes. So any community of practice, we ran a community of practice in the Kent system funded by the Health Foundation a number of years ago. It was evaluated. There are always there's always that balance of informal and formal, and the need for a sort of structured, intentional approach to bringing people together, sharing models, approaches, etc. In effect, this event today is a bit aimed at sort of beginning a learning network. Session later on, we've just popped down there in terms of some of the learning from the conversations that we had with folk and our own experience. But I think you should sort of take the opportunity, buddy up with people, share models, start little focus groups around things. So be informal, but I'm sure that what comes out of the session later on today that Vanessa will lead will also give some overall structure as well, so that those who don't have the opportunity to do the informal can still benefit. So I'll leave that there. And Caroline, back to you. Do you want to stop sharing?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you, if you could. And just as a point of clarification, the slides and all of the resources that have been mentioned today will be shared via the Futures platform. So do keep an eye out for that. There'll be links sent out to everybody who has registered for this event. We've got some fantastic questions coming up. So I'm just going to take the chance, if that's okay, to use the next 5 minutes to just put some of those to you. So Elizabeth from Oxford has just asked a question about how might I be able to sell some of this to my board? It's been a kind of lot of stuff that's gone on around capacity and demand, or the external consultancies coming in. How might you explain system dynamics in a really punchy way and then be able to sort of sell that to a group of very senior leaders as a kind of...
Mark, you or me?
I'll leave that one to you.
Go on then.
Yeah.
I thought you might. It depends who your board is, and so context is everything. And this might sound like sort of almost motherhood and apple pie. Demonstrate it, carve out some time, read some of the material in terms of what can some of the traditional sort of demand and capacity projections, modeling the data, if you like, deliver, and how can you really sort of excite people with the options of playing with a model. A lot of people do like the sort of the interface and the what ifs and the likes. They get drawn in. That's really good, and really just sort of it does depend on what your board's appetite is, and whether you can find some individual sort of champions, if you like, on the board to take your case forward. It's not an easy one, and I think what this event and what the demand and capacity team are doing should at least say, well, you know, they're taking it serious down in London or whatever, then you ought to listen.
I guess there's something about how it addresses some of the key questions and the things that are really pressing on board members' to-do lists. It's certainly, from my time on a trust board, this stuff would have been invaluable of thinking about some of the things that we were struggling with. Mark, come on in.
So I just mentioned one other brief thing, Mark, which is that the preoccupation, there are difficult times out there. You know, capacity is constrained, workforce we can't get, etc., etc. People are just stuck in the here and now. One of the biggest sort of wins for me is where people say, actually, I want some space and time to step back and think strategically. Hey, here's a tool that can help you do that, but it won't solve your problem when you come in tomorrow. So being honest about what it will and won't do, but giving people the opportunity to step back from all the sort of the rush and the pain of the last 2 years. is a decent sell. Mark, you were going to say something.
Yeah, it follows on from you actually, Caroline, and I guess you've been on the board. Each of your board members will have this ongoing question that they want answering, and people will often know kind of what that is because they go on about it all the time, and they'll often say it in meetings or whatever, and people have a blank face. It's using that as a hook, because it's some of those questions really that actually SD can really help with, that often other approaches haven't, because they haven't been used, and because the capability hasn't been there. So perhaps using that as a hook, maybe find out what they want answering, and then try and put it on a page of how SD would work to help support and answer that. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think you wanted to come in here as well, and then we've probably got time for one more question.
We've been asking that question many times, and in particular myself, because I have a technical background. So how I communicate a technical modeling approach to non-technical audiences like IC board members. So we attempted already, at least we developed with MSc student from University of Exeter a tool that we are presenting later today, and it's kind of in the beginning we call it game, but people say no, you cannot tell board members that you are giving them a game, so we call it now a learning tool, more formal. But it can be used in 10-15 minutes. You can present what are the benefits of using system dynamics. They can see a dashboard, they play with it, and they can see also what it could do for them in the future if they use the approach. So we have attempted with that one. If you can attend that session in the afternoon, and try with your board and come back to us and tell us it didn't work, it helped, or it didn't. There is already something out there that can help, because we get into that loop all the time. We struggle to communicate this type of technical concept to non-technical audiences.
Thank you. And there's some nice stuff just generally around sort of getting to yes. I'll put some resources in the chat around that, and selling things more generally. Just as our last question, we've had some lovely reflections in the chat about where does this stuff best sit? Started by a nice question from George about, is this an ICS down thing? Is this an individual trust up thing? Is this providers coming together across a population? Had some lovely reflections from people in the chat about that, but just welcome a couple of minutes from you both on what you think about that before we move on at 11.
So Mark's very kindly reminded everybody of my age. When I joined the NHS in the early 90s, spreadsheets were all sort of becoming the rage, and there were different options in terms of spreadsheets, and they could do clever things, and some people just filled them with words and didn't realize they added up, etc., etc. And you could have asked the question, well, where do spreadsheets sit? Do they sit at the regional health authority, or should they be deployed in the whatever? And of course the answer is it's everywhere, stupid. You know, it's a cultural change to think in systems and to use the appropriate tools. And actually, if you say it only applies in one area, now it might lean towards the sort of questions that ICSs ask, and therefore an ICS will have a keen interest in adopting and using it. But it really is everywhere, and you know, you can solve simple problems in your kitchen with system dynamics modeling if you like. Going back to my first slide in terms of what's a system. So play with it, use it, get the language, and be prepared to be engaged at any level. Being aware that you know, that there are certain sort of I suppose modeling techniques and analytics where you probably wouldn't use it, but that's my answer.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything you'd like to add to that, Mark?
No, not really. Actually, yeah. I mean, its use, you see, can be at any level. I think it's aimed at the system level. I think purely because I think that's, you know, if analysts are coming together at that level, and they can work across boundaries. I think if you had an analyst in a small trust with these skills, and which they can absolutely perform, and good SD models for that particular trust, if they've got particular questions, I think you'll find they'll probably be then being asked to then do models at that kind of strategic level across systems as well. So they'll end up being pulled up and out, I think. So I think really, yeah, I think probably at that system level, but you know, it can be useful for organisations as well, certainly.
Brilliant, thank you. And if we could prevail on you to just have a little look at the chat, because there are some very specific questions for some of you, that if you could just have a look through the chat, if you have time, we'd be massively grateful. That would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for making that really interactive. Loads of stuff going on in the chat. This day is intended as a way of connecting people. That's why Edwin and Vanessa pulled the day together. So just brilliant if you can connect over the course of the day. If you can just drop anything that you think about in the chat, if you can use the chat to connect with one another and share your own experiences, that would be absolutely fantastic. And lots of plugs for the different workshops, so have a look through those and think about where you might want to spend the rest of your time today. That was a really brilliant start to the day. Thank you so much to our presenters, to Alice, to Vanessa, to Peter and to Mark, and to all of you for your questions. We now move on to thinking about something that a few people did raise in the chat about how do you really use system dynamics in urgent and emergency care, one of the big issues that all of our systems are facing now, about how do we really think differently about urgent and emergency care? How do we try to work together, think systems about that? And I think we're going to hand over now to Sean,